You've heard that saying before, work smart, not hard? That's terrible advice, by the way. Work smart, yes, and work hard. Do both. In other words, don't try to get around your problems. Face your problems, because they have a way of piling up. And you're going to get good at anything that you practice. If you practice avoiding your problems, guess what you can get really, really good at in your life? Avoiding problems. If you actually face your challenges and face your problems, you're going to get really good at facing your problems. There's a certain point where, like, you can avoid your problems, like, let's say, getting a ticket, maybe. Fine, you want to avoid that. That's true, probably. But now, fast forward to a point when you're in a relationship with somebody and you're arguing about some problem, some behavior on their part or your own part, and you don't have the courage to face that because you spent so much of your life trying to get around it. So like I said, you're going to get good at whatever it is that you practice. If you practice avoiding problems, you can get really good at avoiding problems, man. You practice daydreaming. If I ever have a company where I need to hire daydreamers, man, apply. But both of those skills aren't going to help you to believe in yourself. Because the only way you believe in yourself is if you have a good reason to. If you overcome challenges and struggles. Like I said, had almost no friends, but there's almost nobody, maybe except for Dostoevsky, who writes more beautifully about love and friendship than this guy does. Because he also realized that to be able to find somebody who you truly connected with, which means to be yourself, not to be part of the herd, but to be yourself. And it takes great strength and courage to be that self, because what that means is having to hate your friends and to love your enemies, as we've said before. And so, to create means having to give into that chaos to a certain extent to create something beautiful. And of course, what's the most beautiful thing a person can create? Except for an authentic, genuine life. To be able at the end to say, yeah, let me watch that life again. When I see people post stuff like that on Instagram, I usually just think like, wow, someone's going through something hard right now, aren't they? What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. But is it true that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger? For some people. And by the way, the statement, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger, comes from this guy. It was Nietzsche who actually wrote that. It was his idea. I've mentioned it before, but think about the pronoun that's being used there. What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. And so when we say that a person goes through struggle and they become better and they become stronger, that's possible. That's possible. What's also possible is that a person becomes jaded, angry, disconnected. They build up walls around themselves. That's possible as well. It's true that growth can't come from a lack of struggle. You have to struggle in order to overcome things. But it also means that I guess destruction can come from a lack of struggle, but destruction can also come from struggle. In other words, people will, rather than overcoming things, people will fall away from them. It's a weird, I don't know, man, like I wrestled with this question for a long time, trying to figure out why it is that some people will overcome challenges and some people just completely fall away from them. I understand why it is that people don't face challenges. Like I think about, good example, like people, for example, who just don't even try. They don't try, and why? And then I understand, for example, a lot of you, I understand why you don't try. You never had to, never really needed to. There's always been somebody there or something there or some program that was there or some person to step in on your behalf to try to fix things for you. And so if you've never really had to struggle and overcome on your own, there's just this presumption that that's just how things are always going to be. It's like you don't even notice it anymore. You know, it's like if a fish is swimming through water, and there's this old story of this little school of fish, that young fish that are going through the water, and this old fish pulls up next to them and he asks them, "How's the water, guys?" And the young fish go like, "The water? What do you mean?" They have no idea what he means by the water. Why? Because they've lived in it their whole lives. They don't know anything different than just the water. And there are some people who don't know anything in life except for struggle. That to them, that's just Tuesday. There are some people who have it so easy that there's a struggle they've never encountered an actual struggle. So for them, when they actually have to encounter something, it can almost be like it's unfair to them. Why me? Why me? I don't remember if it was in this class, but I was telling a story to one of my classes about a friend of mine when I lived in Los Angeles, she was beautiful. She was like Miss LA. She did beauty pageants, stuff like that. And she would tell me these stories about when she'd get pulled over by the police because she was a terrible driver. She got pulled over all the time. And she explained to me that the police were actually wonderful. They're very helpful. So if she gets pulled over, they will let her know, hey, you're speeding, slow down, you gotta be careful. And then they let her go with a warning. And then she'd get pulled over because her brake lights were out. And they would tell her, hey, your brake lights are broken, you gotta get those fixed, it's dangerous. But she never got tickets. Why do you think she never got tickets? Because she was beautiful, yeah. And then one day she got a ticket because a female officer pulled her over, and she was explaining to me afterwards, she was so angry. She was just like, this bitch gave me a ticket, she was so mean, and I laughed and said, you just found out what it's like to be treated, like you just found out what it's like for everybody else. You found out what it was like to be treated like everybody else. And she could not get that through her head, that no, that's not true, because her experience was so soaked in herself, she never saw anything beyond herself. And so there's some people who never really struggle, and then when they actually do come across one, it's just, it could be debilitating. You can feel like the world's going to end. There's some people who, like I said, their whole life is steeped in struggle. They don't know anything except for that. And both of those are very bad ways to grow up. Because if you're steeped in struggle your entire life, you start to see everything in life as a struggle. That parking space at the mall around Christmas time that somebody else got to before you, oh, that's a problem. Yeah? That person at McDonald's, they got your order wrong. Oh man, dude, this is, in other words, every day is a massive struggle. You want to be somewhere, not those two extremes as we've talked about before, but you want to be somewhere in the middle. Because you do want to overcome some things in your life, because, I mean, just at a practical level, that's how you become better. The only way that we actually move in life is if we're uncomfortable. Unfortunately, for a lot of people. This isn't everybody, of course. But if I were to ask you, for example, and it's worth thinking about for yourself, what are some things in your life that you've overcome before? Think about those, and think about the kinds of things you might say. Some people, right now, you'll be thinking like, I've overcome like 10 things today. You know, I've overcome like 50 things in the past 2 weeks. And some people will just say things like, I woke up this morning and I came here. And then we'll say, oh, that's wonderful. I'm so proud of you. For some people, that's a lot. Yeah, I guess so. For some people, that's a lot. But man, when we celebrate something so small, I guess the question is, what can you overcome that's much bigger? There are people who have absolutely no belief in themselves. And I understand why people wouldn't believe in themselves. If you've never done anything, if you've never overcome a struggle, and I mean overcome a struggle, not like you got around it in some way, not like you got away with something. I mean like you actually faced a challenge straight ahead and you overcame it. And I mean like a real one, dude. I mean, and of course you have no reason to believe in yourself. There will be people who will sometimes believe in themselves even though they've never overcome anything, and that's of course a false confidence. It isn't real. And then there are some people who understand that they can believe in themselves because they've overcome some things in their lives. Like if I were to ask you, what can you overcome? A lot of people, the answer is, you really don't know because you haven't tested yourself. A lot of people spend so much of their time trying to get around difficulties. You've heard that saying before, work smart, not hard. That's terrible advice, by the way. Work smart, yes, and work hard. Do both. In other words, don't try to get around your problems. Face your problems because they have a way of piling up. And you're going to get good at anything that you practice. If you practice avoiding your problems, guess what you can get really, really good at in your life? Avoiding problems. If you actually face your challenges and face your problems, you're going to get really good at facing your problems. There's a certain point where, like, you can avoid your problems, like, let's say, getting a ticket, maybe. Fine, you want to avoid that. That's true, probably. But now, fast forward to a point when you're in a relationship with somebody and you're arguing about some problem, some behavior on their part or your own part, and you don't have the courage to face that because you spent so much of your life trying to get around it. So like I said, you're going to get good at whatever it is that you practice. If you practice avoiding problems, you can get really good at avoiding problems, man. You practice daydreaming. If I ever have a company where I need to hire daydreamers, man, apply. But both of those skills aren't going to help you to believe in yourself. Because the only way you believe in yourself is if you have a good reason to. If you overcome challenges and struggles. This guy Nietzsche, he's talking about that. You have to have chaos in yourself. He's talking about creation. That's true. But creation and movement only comes from discomfort. Now, by the way, as we talked about extremes before, Nietzsche goes to an extreme. This guy actually intentionally put challenges in his own life to overcome. This guy went out of his way to face challenges. And so he lives, as you can see, by the way, not a very long life. It says 56 years, but it's not quite that long. He goes insane towards the end of his life. He's walking through Turin, and he sees I guess to start off with, he gains a full professorship by the time he's 23 years old, which, by the way, is incredibly young to get a professorship. This guy, Nietzsche, is so smart, it's scary what this guy comes up with. You can divide the intellectual world between before Nietzsche and after Nietzsche. And it's great because he only sold like 1,500 copies of his books in his own lifetime. But after he dies, we see the genius in him. And part of his genius, by the way, is that he's a philosopher, which is genius in itself, but also he's a philosopher who lives by his philosophy. If you called him a philosopher, it probably would have pissed him off, because he argued that philosophy was just words, attacking words. It didn't do anything. That philosophy, for it to be useful, I guess it has to be useful. It should guide the way in which you live. So he gets his first professorship at 23 years old, and he looks at his life and says, wow, I can spend the rest of my life here doing this. I can be comfortable sitting here, teaching classes, lecturing, having students taking notes. Oh, professor, you're so brilliant. But he realized that would be a life of stagnation, a lack of, over comfort. And so he intentionally sets out to put himself in discomfort so he has things to overcome. This is why he says, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. He's talking about himself. And if any of us can actually say that about ourselves legitimately, man, I don't know if there's anything on earth that can stop you. Because there's nothing that's stronger than a person who's, well, first off, articulate, but secondly, a person who has skill. And what I mean by that is experience in overcoming challenges, adapting, becoming better, becoming stronger. So that you can say, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. And he's, by the way, he says things like, I say in one paragraph what other writers take an entire book to say. He can say that because he put himself in those difficulties. So he resigns from the professorship, by the way. And he spends the rest of his life overcoming difficulties and challenges. He finally goes insane. He's walking through Turin, and by the way, he has almost no friends because it's hard to get along with a personality like that. He's walking through Turin and he sees a horse. It's like sitting in a roadway, it's blocking traffic on both sides, and the traffic's trying to go. The guy who owns the horse is trying to move the horse, and the horse refuses to move. He starts whipping and beating the horse, telling the horse, move, move. And the horse, the more he got whipped, the more he got beaten, he hunkered down. So he runs over to the horse and he throws his arms around him and he says, I understand you. I understand you. And then he loses all connection to reality after that. He spends the last several years of his life in a not quite a vegetative state. What's it called? Like a comatose state where he's awake, he's alert, but he's just, yeah. What's that? Yeah, it's more than that. He doesn't talk. I can't remember the word. I'll think of the word. But he just sat there, and his sister, who started taking care of him at that point, started charging people to come and see the great Nietzsche. Because by that time he became, which is one of the ironies of his life, he becomes very famous towards the end of his life when he's completely unable to interact with people. He's just sitting there with a straitjacket by the fire, just looking crazy, and she's charging people to come and see the great philosopher Nietzsche. There's an irony in that.
That people only come to see him when he's already insane?
Yeah. People only come to see him when he's fully insane. Yeah. And so, but you have to have that chaos. By the way, like I said, had almost no friends, but there's almost nobody, maybe except for Dostoevsky, who writes more beautifully about love and friendship than this guy does. Because he also realized that to be able to find somebody who you truly connected with, which means to be yourself, not to be part of the herd, but to be yourself. And it takes great strength and courage to be that self, because what that means is having to hate your friends and to love your enemies, as we've said before. And so, to create means having to give into that chaos to a certain extent to create something beautiful. And of course, what's the most beautiful thing a person can create? Except for an authentic, genuine life. To be able at the end to say, yeah, let me watch that life again. Questions? Comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? Dope. Happy Tuesday.